didn't know how many people would be here, so I think I made 30. But in a minute, I'll hand off. I'll hand off the last one I have. Just kind of the three main plans, so that you can compare them. And I apologize for that. But before we do all that, and I will try to stay back here, it's like hard for me to do. So you may know that in General Conference 2016, things kind of came to a scary halt as there was rumors of potentially the church splitting. And that split was centered around one thing. And always remember, all of this is about one thing. And that was the relationship that LGBTQ persons and clergy's ability to do marriages and the have with the church. So there was a motion made for the bishops of the church to do something about this. That failed. Then it got scarier, evidently for about 28 other people. And there was a way to bring that motion back, and it passed. And the motion was that the bishops do something about this. So the bishops met, and we determined that we needed to put together a commission, which became called a Commission on a Way Forward. And the way forward was to find some ways that we could continue to live together in some new structures or new relationships that would preserve the unity of the church and that really help us get beyond this. Because as important as our relationship with LGBTQ persons is, at this point it's very difficult to do anything else on the denominational level. And I don't think that anyone really wants to continue to be regarded by some, not by all, please be assured of this, as sort of the problem. And we need to move on. And certainly many, many supporters of full inclusivity in the United Methodist Church wanted there to be a way that we could be in relationship together. So the Council of Bishops, led by a couple of people who have no sense of how long anything takes, they expected within a couple of weeks they would put together the most diverse commission in United Methodist captivity. Well, the goal was good. It just takes a while to put together the most diverse commission in United Methodism. It turned out to be about 32 people, bishops, other clergy, and laity from all over the world. You know United Methodism, right? It includes not only the United States, but the Philippines, Africa, and Europe. And this commission also represented male and female. It represented a wide range of theological perspectives, and it also included LGBTQ persons and family members of LGBTQ persons. I probably left out one of the elements of diversity, but it was truly a very diverse commission. And by the time they got rolling, which was in the fall of 2016, for about the next 18 months, they met as a commission over time, about 30 to 35 days total. And many people were on task forces that included more days than that. So this very diverse commission met a lot to determine a way forward for the United Methodist Church. And I tell that just so you have the context out of which these plans came, but also to recognize how important it was that this diversity worked together and has really contributed, in my estimation, probably the best work we have on this. And so they met and they operated under what's called the mission, vision, and scope. Now, this mission, vision, and scope was put together by July of 2016 by the Executive Committee of the Council of Bishops. And the interesting thing is I've learned to appreciate it more and more and more over these many months. And it's just like, for those of you who are United Methodist, you may be learning all kinds of very interesting things about the Book of Discipline when you take polity, but never overlook our theological task, which is a section of the Book of Discipline that you really do want to quote from time to time, and usually not because you're in trouble. So the mission, vision, and scope is very much like that, our theological task. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. It's available on all the websites that umc.org and others that include all of this information and more. Videos, resources, all kinds of things. But let me just give you a couple of sentences from this. From the mission, the commission will bring together persons deeply committed to the future of the United Methodist Church. So right away, you know, these were people who really did want to preserve the unity of the church. They weren't working to just blow the church up or find a way to split. They were truly trying to find a way forward in which we could live together. And with openness to developing new relationships with each other and exploring the potential future of our denomination in light of General Conference and subsequent annual jurisdictional and central conference actions. Now, the other thing that it says is it acknowledges that the matters of human sexuality and unity are the presenting issues for a deeper conversation that surfaces different ways of interpreting Scripture and theological tradition. Newsflash to the church. This is not the only thing we disagree on. And it's important to remember that. Somehow this has become a very, for some people, a dividing issue, for some. But certainly, there are many other things. But for that matter, you know, as the Scripture says, one in faith, one in baptism, one in agreement on all things, one in our Lord Jesus Christ. No, that's not what it says. Never does it say that we agree on one thing. Our unity is not based on agreement. It's based in our common mission, which is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That's what our unity is based on. It's based on our mission. Therefore, here's from the vision. The Commission will design a way for being church that maximizes the presence of a United Methodist witness in as many places in the world as possible, that allows for as much contextual differentiation as possible, and that balances an approach to different theological understandings of human sexuality with the desire for as much unity as possible. So unity and contextualization. You probably are much more comfortable with the word contextualization than many other people closer to my age anyway. But you understand what it means. You know that in all the places that you come from, there are very different contexts. And so, in many respects, I love this part of the statement that says, maximizes the presence of the United Methodist witness in as many places in the world as possible. Doesn't that seem like what happened in the book of Acts? You know, as they experienced persecution, those early disciples, they were scattered everywhere. And as a result, what they took with them was their faith in Jesus Christ. They were able to be the church wherever they ended up. There was a maximization of the witness of the faith in whatever context they were in. Whether it was a Greek context, a Roman context rather, whether it was a Jewish context, And so, you know, even if you just study the Gospels, you know that Matthew was oriented towards the contextualization of Jewish Christians. You know that John was exceptionally oriented towards the Roman Greek, and it affects what we have even as the Gospels. It's contextualization, and yet one in Christ Jesus. This is very important to remember as we go forward and as you hear people talk. Scope. We should consider new ways of being in relationship across cultures and jurisdictions, and new forms and structures of relationship. Greater freedom and flexibility to redefine our present connectionality, which is showing some signs of brokenness. So you may have heard there was some judicial council's decision released recently, and they gave us a great gift, not only on this, but going forward, which is you can be contextual. You do not have to have uniformity as long as everybody doesn't have to have uniformity. And it's subtle, but it really does set things up, and I think it will set things up for the future, that we can do things differently. Well, welcome to the United Methodist world. We do things differently. They do things differently in Texas than Illinois, than Georgia, than New England, and we might even all claim to be upholding the discipline. We just do things differently because we're in contextually different places. So if you look at all of this more in the future, I highly encourage you to read the mission, vision, and scope of the work that they presented. So the commission then brought their first work product to the November 2017 Council of Bishops meeting, and it includes sort of a sketch of the One Church Plan, sort of a sketch of the Connectional Conference Plan, and sort of a sketch of the Traditionalist Plan. And the Council of Bishops said, we're not interested in the Traditionalist Plan. We had another meeting in February. They brought more detail. And then in May, the Council of Bishops agreed to recommend the One Church Plan. But we said we would send our work product, you know, like when you did math problems and you had to show your work. We would send our work product forward. The Traditionalist Plan did not have legislation attached to it because the commission never worked on it beyond that November sketch. So a handful of bishops, I'd say 3 to 5 maybe, or 3 bishops and a couple of other people, wrote out all the legislation, and which includes all the detail about what the Traditionalist Plan is. It was never recommended by the Council of Bishops. It was never recommended, even worked on beyond November of 2017 by the Commission. But in order to send all of the plans to the Judicial Council this summer, they put together what they wanted the Traditionalist Plan to be. All right, that was a big mistake. Because they just had free reign, which we didn't expect. Yeah. So, all right, so I'm going to talk about the One Church Plan. And it would remove the basic paragraph, it would remove the paragraph that says homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And this has been a sentence that we've been trying to remove from the discipline for quite some time. Part of the One Church Plan is that it helps people who might be able to come along with it to feel comfortable that they're not going to be forced to do anything that they're not comfortable with. Not clergy, not local churches, and not bishops. So the language is really more directed towards them than it is any kind of affirmation. So we agree we are not of one mind about human sexuality. Persons of good conscience interpret and decide issues of sexuality differently. We also acknowledge that the church is called through Christ to unity, even amidst complexity. So, this affirms the conscience of all people, especially those who would not want to do weddings and even have ordained LGBTQ persons. So we affirm those who continue to maintain the spiritual witness does not condone the practice of homosexuality, and we believe that their conscience should be protected in the church and throughout society under basic principles of religious liberty. But we also affirm those who believe that the witness of Scripture calls us to reconsider the teaching of the church with respect to monogamous homosexual relationships. So you kind of see the foundation of the plan set up. What it does not do, of course, is ensure full inclusion of LGBTQ persons throughout the whole church. And that is acknowledged. So the one church plan when it comes to marriage, no clergy can be required to perform or be prohibited from performing a marriage of LGBTQ persons. And each clergy has the right to exercise his or her own conscience to refuse or to agree to do that, no matter what a local church decides or even your annual conference decides. Okay? So local church involvement, this may be the only vote that a local church has to make, and it may decide by a majority at a church conference that they would permit ceremonies to be performed in their church. But if a church doesn't even want to go there, and they don't have to vote on that, and a clergy person cannot do a wedding in that church, but a clergy person could do a wedding somewhere else without any concern about being brought up in charges anymore. All right. Then, in the one church plan, LGBT clergy are permitted. The ordination of LGBTQ persons are permitted. But it's possible that an annual conference, clergy sessions of annual conference may set a policy. So some may say, yes, y'all come. Some may say nothing, in which case they will simply decide per person. Do you have the gifts and skills to be a pastor? The whole issue of sexuality may or may not be addressed at all. And some may decide that they don't want to ordain LGBTQ persons. Annual conference, boards of ordained ministries, and clergy sessions. And a church can then just inform their DS whether they're willing to have in a conference where they know there's LGBTQ people, clergy, whether they're willing to have a person be appointed, and clergy can do likewise. Okay? So you may be thinking about your own annual conference. Some of you are from Northern Illinois, for instance. Would Northern Illinois be clear that they would ordain LGBTQ persons? I think that's a high possibility. However, local churches still across the Northern Illinois Conference, which is very diverse, some may say, but we don't want a clergy person who's LGBTQ persons. Clergy can say, I want to be in a church that will accept an LGBTQ person. Pension's a big deal in all of these plans. A local church could leave an annual conference that decides, for instance, that it wants to ordain LGBTQ persons. A local church could lead that annual conference, and it would have to contribute to the long tail of liability on pension, which means it's not just what a church is paying on pension this year, it's what the annual conference has relied upon that church paying for the years to come for all the clergy who are yet alive, who have been in that congregation. So, I think some people sort of cavalierly say, well, we'll just leave. And the reality would be that it's probably about $150,000 to $200,000 that they would need to contribute to the pension in order to do that. Now, it's worse for departing clergy. Yes, you get whatever pension you have, but it's capped at the date you leave. And let's, this isn't the case for you so much, but it'd be worse if you were to leave the denomination. It'd be capped at the rate of that day. And so somebody who's about 50, don't call anybody out, somebody who's about 50, it would be capped, and they would probably make about 150 to 200,000, no, I'm sorry, somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 less, because they capped it then if it continued to grow until they retire, and then they continue to get roughly 2% increase every year. So it's a big hit for clergy who decide to leave. So, impact on United Methodist related institutions. This plan has the least impact of the plans directly towards such institutions as colleges, seminaries, camps. They can develop their own contextual approach. In terms of the seminary, it seems to me that since particularly the 13 seminaries are a part of the whole general conference, that if the one church plan went through, you could develop your own contextual decisions that that people could come. And if institutions choose to change their affiliation, which they could do, there's a process already in the Book of Discipline. So this has the least amount of impact for seminaries. So then there's the Connectional Conference Plan. Yeah, already I see smiles. The Connectional Conference Plan is very complicated. And so, there are 5 jurisdictions in the United States. This applies mostly to the U.S., although central conferences could join one of these connectional conferences. So, unfortunately, the colors aren't all that great here, but one would be basically the annual conference would be very progressive in that, in fact, LGBTQ persons, ordination, marriages, everything would be the norm. One would be more like the one church plan. You don't have to. And one would be more like the traditionalist model, which we'll describe in a minute, which is pretty restrictive on all things LGBTQ. So that the whole United States would basically be divided up. Each one would have to develop their own book of discipline, and they would have to figure out their own requirements for ordination and their relationship with such things as seminaries and boards and agencies. So it's called the Big Sort. So a jurisdiction would perhaps say we're going to be in this particular conference, connectional conference. But let's just say the annual conference says, no way. Let's just say the jurisdiction decides they want to be traditionalists. So an annual conference like Northern Illinois, I'm kind of almost pretty certain that they would say, no, we can't be a part of that if that's what the jurisdiction is going to do. So they go over here and they choose to belong to, at least the one church plan. And then each local church has to decide what they're going to do. They may stay with the jurisdiction, or they may stay with the annual conference of which they're a part, or they may say, no, we want to be in a different connectional conference plan. So that local church is over there. And then finally, a clergy member decides whether they're going to stick with the jurisdiction or go with a different connectional conference or remain with their annual conference. So, sometimes when we describe this, we actually get guffaws. And the thing is, I think it's still in play, to tell you the truth. So we do need to kind of take it seriously. It would probably take until 2026 to complete, because the jurisdiction would decide in 2020 which connectional conference they would be a part of, the annual conference in 2021, the local church by 22, and clergy by 23. But, this is not a simple plan. and the implications for getting all of our pensions right, as well as organizing into these various connectional conferences, would take about until 2026. So this is all we would do. This would be it, pretty much. It would take a lot of work. But, as I said, don't. So there are certain agencies that would stick with some of the conferences, but I think that's probably not as important. So, impact on United Methodist related institutions. Property owned by the annual conference follows the annual conference. Jurisdictional properties, of which at least the North Central has none. But some of the other jurisdictions, Southeast, South Central, I'm not sure that Northeastern does, and I don't think the West does. But they have some hefty properties, so they would stick with the jurisdiction. And people could serve in all three connectional conferences. Yeah, but kind of way. Traditionalist Plan in regards to LGBTQ clergy. It tightens the definition of self-avowed practicing homosexual. If you're married, which can easily be determined on public record, then that would be an offense. Such persons would be removed. It sets minimum penalties on clergy performing same-gender weddings, which means if you did it once, you're suspended for a year without pay. If you do it twice, you're done. Bishops, bishops must rule LGBTQ candidates ineligible and not to ordain them or commission them. So, for instance, presently, it's my understanding, if somebody comes before me for commissioning, and I have serious doubt, or ordination, I have serious doubts about their standards for ministry, anything but this, there's nothing I can do. But on this one, I would be chargeable if I ordained somebody that I knew was LGBTQ. You have to, you cannot ordain them. And now this part has been modified by the Judicial Council decisions, but initially annual conferences must certify upholding tightened prohibitions. So every annual conference would somehow have to certify that we would not commission or ordain any LGBTQ persons. And that we would not have anybody on our board of ordained ministry who wasn't willing to follow that ruling or that disciplinary action. Each member of the board of ordained ministry would have to certify that they would uphold these prohibitions. And boom would have to certify that they examined the sexuality of each candidate. Through social media and other means of determining whether someone is LGBTQ, and they have to ask them directly. And boom must certify, they examine social media candidates. Now, Northern Illinois has a judicial council ruling against us saying that we have to do that anyway, but we try to find the best candidates possible. Board of Ordainment. Are you on the Board of Ordainment? No, but James. We want good candidates, but people who are going to be effective in ministry. So the Traditionalist Plan, if you fail to certify, I think it's funny that they put the can't use the cross like that's the least of anybody's problem. You get no funds from the denomination. The bishops wouldn't be paid. The annual conference wouldn't receive any of the funds. That's where you come in. And like we get a lot of grants from our boards and agencies here in Northern Illinois to create partnerships. Funds are always going back and forth in the denomination. We've received no more as of January 2021. And GCFNA would negotiate the exit of a conference that was unable to certify any of this. So they would find a way for you to leave. A group of 50 churches must be permitted to exit the denomination. However, the Judicial Council ruling said that wasn't quite right. And so the Traditionalist Plan has a very elaborate and long piece of legislation on it that's called gracious exit, which essentially means that you would be allowed to leave the denomination with your building. You've all heard of the trust clause, right? If you're United Methodist. It goes on every church, whether you have it in your bylaws or anything else. So usually we have to negotiate that if the church is going to leave. But this gracious exit would allow anybody who wanted to leave or was kicked out to take their building with them. And they would only have to pay that liability on pension that I talked about earlier. Now, this is just me. All right, this is just my speculation. That if we get as far as the one church plan at the special general conference, that this whole gracious exit thing will get plucked off of this legislation and amended onto the one church plan. In which case, it's all set up, isn't it? For the Wesley Covenant Association, if you know anything about that, who are already, since the Judicial Council rulings, saying that it's time for churches to leave. Because they have their own requirements for ordination, they kind of have their own book of discipline together. So in some respects, you see this sort of, they're wannabes. And so you can see how this may have been set up to allow for this to come onto the one church plan if we go that direction. Okay, impact on United Methodist Church related institutions. Retain the current relationships and affiliations unless under their bylaws they change these relationships. And have to consider what impact the plan would have on students coming to the seminary. I think that's the big one. In talking with another seminary that's not United Methodist, I think you might be thinking that could be a good source of United Methodist students. Refugees. Then there are other plans. There's a book of 100 pages or more, the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate. It's out, but you can also get it online. It has a whole bunch of legislation in it. Some pretty interesting stuff. And one of them is called the Simple Plan, which simply removes the prohibitions in the Book of Discipline. It is my personal opinion that most of what's in that book is going to be ruled not in harmony with the call of the special general conference. But that remains to be seen. I could be wrong. So, there you have it. Do you want me to do just a little bit of question and answer? Sure. Okay, and then I did give you this. This was created by Dave Knuckles, who is was a member of the commission. He's a lay person from Minnesota. And the only thing is, this just doesn't seem like Dave. It says the Judicial Council deletes. Well, the Judicial Council did not delete anything from any of the plans. They all still come forward, and the body itself, the General Conference, will have to decide if they're going to amend them, or delete them, or do whatever they're going to do. So don't be fooled by that, okay? All right, do you have any questions? How are you feeling? Oh, I didn't, yeah. I forgot to say something, but.
Just a real quick, for under the one church plan, Can the churches, you made some statement that churches can decide to leave and move. Can they change conferences under the one church plan?
Yeah, I've actually had at least one church ask if they could join Northern Illinois.
Okay.
But think about that. I mean, that any of those plans gets really complicated in terms of, so like I'm just kind of curious if somebody from Northern Illinois is going to want to go serve in another geographical area. We barely get them to move within ours. So, you know, you have to go too far. You may not want to do that. I think it's going to be very complicated. So what I forgot to tell you is the Judicial Council ruling, the one church plan took out, what, 4 sentences, all of which I believe people think we could just amend by deletion when we get there. And it's really not. In fact, it might be an improvement. However, the Traditionalist Plan had 9 things that were ruled unconstitutional. Like I just said, they remain in the plan, but if they're going to move the Traditionalist Plan forward, they're going to have to speak to them, amend them, whatever. There's, you know, it's sort of, the Traditionalist Plan sort of looks like Swiss cheese at this point. But even if they took it forward the way it is, it's still got some bad stuff in it. Yes?
I'm curious about the Connectional Plan, how this would affect like safe sanctuary policies in churches, because right now, I know conferences already spread across multiple states, so they have to deal with different state laws about like safety regarding vulnerable persons, but I wonder, like, has the Connectional Plan thought about the implications that you would be dealing with 50 different policies dealing with vulnerable people?
Yeah, I don't think they've actually thought about that particular one, but you highlight the fact that it's very complicated. And those of us who have any pension, if you're still in all of that, I mean, it becomes very complicated in terms of tracking the pension. You get your pension. It's just, you know, when 3 or 4 conferences came together in the New York area, it took several years to complete the actual listing of everybody's pension. I personally find that a little scary. And that's a lot of work when you think about it across the whole denomination. Let's just say Westpath's not eager for this. Any other questions? So I just want to say the Traditionalist Plan with its constitutional dings, you know, it has been somewhat abandoned by some of its enthusiasts, but it still remains in play, and it, you know, will be up to the body as to whether they decide that this is something that they want to move forward. I'll just say, I mean, this isn't the United Methodist Church that I've known and loved. So we hope that won't be the case. And as a result, I know that the one church plan isn't what everybody would want it to be, perhaps. But I think it does retain a place that we can begin to move forward. Over the years, I would say there's been this strategy by very progressive persons that said if it's not all of us going forward together, then, you know, we're not. So I think it was in 2008, there was legislation that if it was legal in your state or country to do a gay marriage or civil union, you could do it. Well, at that point, there was just a couple of states in the United States, maybe Iowa and a couple others, where it was legal. And so if everybody can't go forward, and we're not going forward, and they voted it down. I mean, progressives voted it down. 2 years later, the whole country as legal gay marriage. Do you get my point? Let's take some steps forward, and we can work on it from there. So that's why I'm a proponent of the One Church Plan, even though I know it does not, as it is, address full inclusivity.
So the One Church Plan is what was recommended by the commission on the report, is that right?
Right, and the bishops.
And was that a unanimous agreement between all those who are on the commission?
I'm not sure that the commission ever took a vote, but the council did, and it wasn't unanimous, but it was overwhelming.
Okay. It just seems to me that the commission can be an example as to how conversation can be a useful tool for creating, like co-creating something. And so like how can we replicate that on the local level?
On the local level, I think it's possible, because remember, they met 35 days. And we're not going to meet 30 or 35 days at General Conference. And we rarely get to do that at any, other level. But in a local church, I mean, this is the beauty of the local church. You can have ongoing conversations where people come to know each other and can continue to talk with each other under the proper guidance, even when you disagree. Yes, it can happen. I've seen it happen. So you're right. It can happen.
Yeah, I think we need to be providing resources, or maybe there already are resources.
I'm not sure if we know enough of their process of how that happened. But it's good. It's a good point. Any others? Yes.
So I think one thing that hasn't been addressed or talked about widely is the fact that we're having this general conference in 2019, yet we also have another general conference in 2020 of which we're electing delegates to and could theoretically alter or affect anything that happens at the coming up conference. So would you comment on that, or our ability to stay forward, or with the elections coming up and everything?
Yeah, we have another one. And, I think that's possible. So one of the other things that I look at in terms of these plans is that the Traditionalist Plan and the Simple Plan seem to have one thing in common. And that is, it really doesn't move us forward. It just moves us to 2020 and we start at it again. You know what I mean? So we're going to take this out, we're going to take that out. Now the Connectional Conference Plan, that'll have constitutional amendments, something like, they say 8, but it's really lumping together about 28. And so we could do all of that and within a year or two discover that they weren't approved. So that could halt it, nothing happens. And so we're back at it in 2020. I believe the One Church Plan provides the only possibility for, people may leave, churches may leave, but this, this kind of sets us, this sort of sets things up and can provide more of a moratorium, at least in 2020, to move forward. But your point is well made. I mean, it doesn't have any constitutional amendments. People can take out any number of things or add or whatever. But I think there'll be a spirit if you actually do something in 2019 to hold. And I think that one provides the greatest possibility. But yes.
So there's a possibility that nothing happened for 2019, that it just, nothing happens. So at that point...
That's actually the worst case scenario.
Right. Worst case scenario, everything is tabled, nothing, we start over in 2020? Then what? So is 2020 the new special commission, or what happens after that?
It's not like we start over and we just go back to what we were doing.
Right, so do we just pretend it didn't happen and we spend all this time and money and it's over?
Well, I think you will find at General Conference 2019, there's a fairly tight, it's only 3 days. It's a fairly, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are the actual work days. Saturday is a prayer day, and making sure everybody gets there in a snowstorm, just in case. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the actual days that we have to work. And so I think you'll find the constant conversation, at least from the presiders, saying, in order for us to do something, I know you want to do something, we need to complete this particular task now. We need to get to this by the end of the day. It's still up to the body, and I just would hope that this body in particular would not waste $1 million or $2 of dollars and the hard work of people who actually represent the diversity of this church. I mean, if I were on the commission, and I have a number of friends on the commission who were on the commission, I've never heard any of them say this. But if I had been on the commission, gave up that much time over the last 18 months, and people just blew it off, I would really be upset. Yes, Kate?
Will it be the same process for deciding what bishops preside at the special session as for normal sessions?
So we're working on that. And there's been a group identified. They'll be trained more than usual. And we believe that the Committee on Presiding Officers will most likely pick from that group.
Bishop, just to go back to that previous point, do we know if there's a concerted effort to make nothing happen? Is there an organization around making nothing happen? Because it seems like a viable strategy for a group who wants to continue this fight.
We don't have any firm details on it. But I think that is a viable strategy for some. But that's what I'm saying. We all have to work. Whether you work from a presider's end, if I were to be to preside, or you work from the edges, if you go, is to keep telling people we need something to happen.
To pray about it.
To pray and to work for that, for something to happen. I mean, hopefully something bad doesn't happen. Any others? Yes.
Just one more. You have been in the politics of the church for a long time. How do you ensure that you don't get angry or fearful, or what are your practices that I can practice?
Well, I mean, as has been mentioned, I think we need to pray for the church and recognize that, God still shows up these days. And expect that God will show up. Now, I've had some discouraging times, but 2 weeks ago Friday, or whenever it was, when the Judicial Council decision came out, that was the best day I've had in United Methodist since I don't know when. But then I said, okay, I'm going to enjoy it today. I'll be high alert tomorrow. Doing my part, trying to educate people, trying to move people along in this. Don't just, I see other people's fear about what would happen if the church was more inclusive, and trying to move them along. I sometimes maybe spend too much time and words on, helping them just to move forward, to allow, as I've told this annual conference, if you're conservative, be conservative, but make disciples of Jesus Christ. Make that your mission. If you're progressive, be progressive. But making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world is what you should be about. Make that your mission. And to just try to do what I can from my position, just like you can do what you can from your positions. You are in a very important position, by the way. You know this, right? Because you already have debt to go to seminary. Right? Most of you. And what really impresses people right now is that people are still going to seminary. People are still wanting to be commissioned and ordained in the United Methodist Church. And some of you are young And others of you have given up a lot to be here. And when you speak from that perspective, it does give the chills to some folks. I'm just saying. So use your voice, use your experience, write some things. You know, maybe I wouldn't be surprised if some of you come from a local church or an annual conference that maybe isn't quite as inclusive as you would like. Anybody? You know, there may be ways that you can speak. I still believe in the United Methodist Church. I still feel called. You know, what are we going to do the day after the special session of General Conference?
Make disciples of Jesus Christ for transformation.
Yep. So, you know, remind people of that. Maybe know some delegates. Write them a little email. Text them. Tell them, you know, I'm in seminary. I want to serve a church that can welcome everybody. Please keep that in mind. What about your children or your grandchildren, you might say? Like if you know that maybe they're supporters of the traditionalist model, ask them. Do you think this church will still be around? Is this the church of the next generation that goes to the traditionalist model? I don't think so. We're so over you. I think you have a lot. I mean, you know, don't do anything to seriously jeopardize your own situation, but you still have a voice, and you're a voice that a lot of people are willing to listen to. All right.
A hard act to follow.
I'm about to switch you water.
Oh yes, let's do switch water. I don't know, I should drink what she's drinking. Bottle that up. Just a couple things to say in response to some of what you said, Bishop Dyck, and you started with this observation, or somewhere early on, about how much energy, and let's just throw in how much money is being spent on all of this matter for 50 years and has diverted and increasingly diverted our attention from Mission Central. We're thinking it's mission misbegotten.
Yeah.
Is where we go. So I hear that, and it's a very saddening thing. On the matter of property and who owns what and implications for Garrett-Evangelical, to my knowledge, Garrett-Evangelical is not owned by the Northern Illinois Conference, and we are only in a relationship with Northwestern University in terms of our property. And so we have a little more wiggle room than some of our other United Methodist seminaries. For example, Candler at Emory University is owned by the jurisdiction there, and so they have to be very careful about what they do. We're not answering to anyone officially or formally in that regard. So that's some relief. And then the other thing I want to tell you about, and I mentioned this to the Board of Trustees, I think in October or maybe in May. Last April, I was invited to a gathering in Dallas, an Anchor Institutions gathering that was sponsored by the Texas Methodist Foundation. And they invited, maybe 5 or 6 of our United Methodist presidents, deans, freestanding university schools, some of the hospital executives, some executives from the foundations. And it was very interesting to hear my colleagues in our theological education talk about how they're responding to the possibilities of what will happen in 2019. And so you have a couple of freestanding schools that say, we're not thinking about being solely involved with United Methodist students. Now, that's easier for some of our freestanding schools to say. Almost 70% of our student body are United Methodist or Pure Methodist. So we have a very strong connection to the denomination in this. Some of our other freestanding schools have many fewer United Methodist students, and it's a little easier to speak about. But what they're basically saying is we're not going to put all of our eggs in one basket with United Methodist Church. We're ecumenical. We are 35 different denominations here. We are also, and we're talking about being more intentional to reach out to that group of persons. But they're saying we're going to go in some other directions, some bigger directions. We're not going to depend on the United Methodist Church in the same way that we have been depending on it. The hospital execs and the deans or presidents, the deans of the university embedded schools, both said, we have legal issues with the denomination, and if there's any whisper of discrimination coming out of this conference, our institutions are going to distance themselves from the United Methodist Church, which is heartbreaking because some of these institutions, like Canberra, is one of our flagship schools in the U.S. So that's just part of some of the larger ecology. Now, I want to refer to the Book of Discipline, and this would be one of the less exciting paragraphs, not our theological task, etc. But I was on the phone for about half an hour yesterday with Greg Berquist, who is the Associate General Secretary at the General Board of Higher Education Ministry. He works with the United Methodist schools, the theological schools in particular, to discuss with him NEF scholarships. Because I have some understanding of the NEF that comes to our seminaries, but I have not had a very clear understanding of NEF money that is in the annual conferences. And some of you have asked several times, what about our NEF money? So just to rehearse with you a little bit of what I became even more clear about yesterday, is that NEF money, you may know this, and I don't know how the figure is set. There is a way, there is some group, a council was the language, that sets a figure, and there must be some formula for annual conferences as to how much a portion of money they are to raise for NEF funds. So NEF funds are raised by annual conferences. Annual conferences can overfund their NEF if they like, but the church, the annual conference, is looking for a certain amount of money to be raised each year. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But there are three purposes for which that money can be used. It can be used for theological education, for continuing education of elders and deacons, diaconal ministers. I had a little discussion with Ken Ehrman yesterday about this. I've learned may include the deaconesses, and that may be why the language is there and not deacons. And then course of study. That money can go to support course of study. So those are the general purposes. And as I've just said, NEF's funded by the annual conferences, so 25% of those funds are retained in the annual conference. And again, they can be spent on scholarship, course of study, and continuing education. So in each of your annual conferences, there should be NEF money that's available in part for scholarships for your theological education. 75% of that goes to the General Board of Higher Education, which then disperses it to the theological schools, and we each have a formula that we've just worked on submitting our formula to GBHEM, and that's determined in consultation with the school, so we have some say in that. But number of registered candidates, do we have the minimum 40% of our faculty that are United Methodist or Historic Wesleyan affiliated? We get bonus points for racial ethnic diversity and gender diversity in that formula. And Garrett-Evangelical does pretty well, but I can tell you when it first began, and I don't know what year, 30 years ago, we probably got about 30% of our budget from NEF. Now we get like 7 or 8% of our budget from NEF. And this quadrennium, the NEF is being reduced by 25% each year. And I'll come to the next bit of news on that. So we get a various amount of money from this. So now at the seminaries, NEF can be spent on student scholarships, supporting faculty and staff salaries and benefits of those teaching UM students, which basically means everybody. And I'm going to wait and be a little more disciplined here because I have something I want to say to you about that. Let me come back. I'm going to tell the story here. So a couple of years ago, when we announced, and Dean Rivera was instrumental in helping us work out a partnership with CTS down the road to exchange United Methodist study courses for a queer studies certificate. And I'll just say one of our board members raised a question with me, very constructively approached, though I had suspicions about why this board member was raising a question, to say, you know, in paragraph, I got a long email, and all the paragraphs were quoted about how MEF could be spent and for what. And it may not be used, sorry, I don't have the exact language, but it may not be used to promote or support homosexuality in any way, shape, or form. And the question was that this board member had just seen the breaking news on the First Study Certificate and said, is any of our money being used to scholarship students doing those courses? And I wrote back and said, I will. Actually, I didn't write back anything at that point. I let it sit. And then I got on the phone and talked to Kim Kate, who's the general secretary at GBHEM, and another person there, and got straight about this. And I was able to say, to come back, because this person was concerned that we would be financially gained in some way. If we don't meet the criteria, we can lose up to 30% of our MEF, which would then go back to or be distributed around the scholarship. So this is a little bit of fancy dancing, but all very legal. Because the fact of the matter is that the salary, the total number, I can't quote the total number of our faculty salary benefits and staff benefits, far exceeds any MEF money we get. And 57% of our endowment is restricted for scholarship. So I was able to say to this person, we have such great endowment, we don't have to spend that MEF on scholarship money, and we don't. It goes into a pot that's distributed. And I say, and it is contributing toward paying for our faculty. And this person was very satisfied that we were safe, and I never heard another word about it. So it was all played out on the level of, are we abiding by the discipline? And I was able to say, yes, I believe we are. Now, you may have a breaking word on this, Bishop Dyck, but I was at a meeting this summer where we were told that the general church agencies, budgets, etc., boards and agencies, budgets were going to be cut by 23%, which means MEF gets cut again. We've already had a 25% cut. Now there's another 23 to 25% cut expected. Some of our seminaries are open because they have MEF money. We would feel that because that would be a 50% cut over about 8 or 9 years in our funding from the denomination. And that's one of the things I'm very proud of about our denomination is that we really do try to support our schools. Other denominations don't. But that's diminishing and has been for many years. So we are actually incorporating that projection into our budget projections, and we will be able to absorb it and deal with it. We'll feel it, but we're not going to be closing our doors. Some other schools will be right on the edge without that money. I understand that the Council of Bishops has said something to the effect of they don't support this cut, and it's been sent back to GCF&A, or it will be taken up in the conference in 2020.
I'm not sure the language is as strong as don't support.
Okay.
But it needs to be reviewed.
Okay. Yes, it needs to be reviewed about who's getting cut and who's not getting cut.
I can't tell you what exactly a couple of words were, but it wasn't that we were totally non-supportive.
Okay. I'll take that up with Greg when I see him in a few days. So the question is, what can you do? And this is what I would say to you. Be proactive on your own behalf. Your annual conference has MEF money that you can rightfully ask about and inquire about what kind of money is available and how to get it. for scholarship support purposes. I do know that one of the things that's been controversial is that there are annual conferences that are sitting with hundreds of thousands of dollars in NEF money that isn't being spent. They're just sitting on it. And
What's wrong?
yeah, and nobody's doing anything about it. So
Take it, send it to me.
okay. Well, I don't know how far you can get into the weeds in your annual conference, but you might just say, you know, what do you have? NEF support will continue in theological schools at some level for some time, and we use it, we value it, we want it. But as I said, we have incredible, distinctive amount of money set aside in our endowment for scholarship. I would encourage you to investigate the loans and scholarships at GDHEM. I think we're very proactive about that, Becky, in our financial aid. Of course, there are federal loans and then your local congregation. So that's what I would say at this point. I don't know if you have any questions about the scholarship part of it. And I want to come back to you, Bishop Dyck, one more time about something else, but. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe this has been answered elsewhere, but I'm thinking about the scholarships that are offered to students specifically, like for doing ordination in the United Methodist Church. You know, like God forbid, but like what if the most like traditional version like does come to pass? What does happen to that like money, I guess, for students?
Good, Becky's got my back.
Yes. No, well, I was just going to bring this up because I know some of our scholarships are named that we give out here through our endowment, not related to NEF, are like UMC scholarships because you have a call to serve the United Methodist Church or Deacon Fellows. That scholarship will be there for you. That will not be taken away because of things outside of your control. The only reason a scholarship from us would be taken away is because you're not in good standing or haven't met the grade 1 level. So that is secure.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Great question.
Yes.
So I'm curious how this affects, because there is a clause in the discipline about the church cannot finance the support of LGBTQ people in general church funds or something like
Can't
that.
promote homosexuality, whatever that means.
Whatever that means, but like how does that, I guess like at the Traditionalist Plan, like I'm sure that there are people who are going to discipline with a fine-tooth comb or going to use any opportunity they can. I don't see anything in out of the plans that removes that. That stated they were.
No, it does not remove it from the one church plan.
The one church plan doesn't remove that clause. Well, that's good.
You know, the other.
No, it doesn't, it keeps it in there.
Yeah, that's my, I was sarcastic.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
The one thing that would concern me is that if you've been on our website, you know that we're out very publicly with a rainbowed building, thank you, Shane, in terms of inclusivity. I think that's great. I want posters. An inclusivity statement. And I think it's not beyond the imagination to think that people would say, they put a finger on some of our schools and say we are promoting and raise questions. There are already places out there in the United Methodist Church that they don't want to send their students to one of our 13 schools. The 13 schools get blamed for the demise or the decline, I should say, in membership. And you know that's a hot potato that goes back and forth. And they want to hold on to it, and they want to get rid of NEF altogether for the theological seminary. So there's a movement out there to hold money in annual conferences, and we'll train our people in that. So, you know, they could come after us in some ways if they wanted to, but I think we have a pretty strong argument to make.
Do any of you, though, belong to a conference that provides significant money towards your education, and then you have to serve there for 5 years? So that would be interesting. 6 years, whatever.
6 years for every 1 year.
Ours is 7.
7 years? I mean, depending on how it goes, God forbid, that could be very difficult. You see what I mean?
Or you can pay back the money.
Yeah.
Or
you can
it's
pay-
just a regular loan.
Pardon me?
Or it's just a regular loan. You just pay it back.
All right, I just like all of a sudden thought about that, because I know some of you have those. Sorry.
Well, do you foresee any issues, I mean, with the traditionalist plan, obviously, but still with the one church plan, depending on conferences, issues with conferences restricting conference scholarships to students based on which school they go to?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think conferences are in control of how they give that money and for what purposes. And, you know, it's so interesting because we have conferences that will send their students to non-Methodist schools because they're convenient and they're approved by the union. We have 38 approved non-United Methodist schools, which don't help the 13 of us that are approved by the Book of Discipline. But yes, I do think some conferences, for theological reasons, would not want to be ordaining people who went to certain schools. So they would probably be strongly encouraged to go here or there by threat of not being ordained. Or not, yes, yes.
Well, I think just to add to that too, we already have that taking place through a lot of conferences, making MEF or any other form thing with certified candidacy and then not certifying women or not certifying queer folks as we go about. So I think that's already happening on the conference level and not being talked about.
That is a concern about the one church plan, that in a sense it's a, you know, like if churches can say we don't want an LGBTQ person, then could they begin to say we don't want a person of color, we don't want a woman. But, you know, people say some of those things anyway, I'll just let you know. But it's part of our, you know, that's part of our constitution, our discipline. So it remains, but I do think it's a sensitive part. I mean, if it kind of affects the culture in that regard, the culture of the United Methodist Church.
The question came up in one of the other sessions it reminded me just with what you were saying in terms of the relationship of our social principles to things like that happening and how binding they are. Just curious if you have thoughts on
Well, in 2020, there's going to be a revision of the social principles, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm the president of General Court Church and Society, and I think they're looking good. They will deal with human sexuality as soon as the General Conference 2019 is over, so they've done most things. Trust me, it's just one more, you know, exercise in how we don't agree on all things. So I believe, you know, the dowry and polygamy are in there because they're truly sort of global, and so you know, presently there's pretty much freedom as to what you want to uphold in the social principles. You know, they're commended to us or something like that, but then the sentences around homosexuality got embedded in the discipline itself. So that's what makes it a little bit different than gambling, death penalty, care for God's creation, believe in science, those kinds of things.
I know with the Traditionalist Plan, it came up in one of the meetings that a lot of the, like the certification stuff could be constitutional if it's, instead of just restricted towards LGBTQ like it is right now, it's Book of Discipline. Does that extend to the social principles as well?
So the Judicial Council decision said you can't just specify this one thing to certify on this one thing. If you certify, it has to be that you uphold everything in the Book of Discipline.
And how are they going to police celibacy and singleness and monogamy?
Social media.
And how it, or
Don't take it, anybody, whatever you do.
indebtedness to be embarrassed by,
Or
you know, how would they?
science.
Yeah, how would they even begin to do that?
You know, I think that's a bigger slippery slope. It's like, how do you do that with any sense of integrity?
Yeah, it's called totalitarian.
Yeah.
I've lived in that before, so.
yeah. Anything else? Yes, David.
Bishop Dyck, I kind of talked to Kim about this a week or so ago. I'm kind of curious why the LGBT anti-funding for causes that promote the practice of homosexuality, why that still is sticking in the one. Why did that still make its way in there when it seems like they're trying to remove all and contextualize? It still seems like that makes a statement in itself. Why did that stay in the one church? Do you have a sense for that?
This is my guess.
Okay.
You know, that it has to do with money. So in the one church plan, the jurisdictional conference has to raise the money for its bishops. I actually don't think that's such a bad idea because that will really help jurisdictions figure out how many bishops they're really able to support. Now but they put that in there because there are some people in other jurisdictions that don't want to pay for Bishop Karen Olivito's salary. So I think they kind of maintain the financial aspects. There's some places in the church where they don't want to give their apportionments for promoting homosexuality. To my knowledge, there is no definition of what promoting homosexuality really is in the context of the discipline or anywhere else. And but I think that's the issue. Again, there were places where they wanted people to come along, and if you didn't feel like your money was going, then maybe they would come along. I mean, it doesn't work in the reverse, however. So all the apportionment money that comes from LGBTQ persons around the world, or UMCOR, it doesn't seem to go the other way. So, you know, maybe some arguments I want to make.
Is that something that could be petitioned at 2019 to take that out? Could that be amended?
It could be.
Is it?
Maybe could be an amendment, but it could be amendment in 2020, a petition in 2020.
Yeah.
If it's not an amendment, it might be deemed to fall outside the call.
Harmony.
In harmony with the call.
It might. I don't know.
So if you were chairing, how would you rule that?
I didn't find out.
We can only hope that Bishop Sally will be one of the presiders, because as I said, she's not to be messed with. It's good. And I had a thought that 28 amendments glommed into 8 cannot possibly be dealt with in 3 days, is my guess.
Well, so the 8 really have to do with changing the language to regional or something like that, or to the central conference terminology, I should say. And, you know, you're either for that plan or you're not, but if you have to deal with all these constitutional amendments around the world, you know, we're not real good at passing amendments.
All right. Anything else?
Well, I was just gonna, if we were closing up, I just wanted to remind everybody that tomorrow, same place, 11:10.
No, I know.
To noon is Reverend Grace and Matthew, who is pastor at First United Methodist Church here. I also learned today that Kathy Cheney Egan is going to be joining her. She works at Reconciling Ministries Network and helped fund Reverend Grace's trip to Liberia in 2017. And Reverend Grace is here to talk to us some about the Central Conference and its implications and all of that with this General Conference as well. So if you haven't heard her preach or speak, come. I think you will find it a very good session.
She's also our commencement speaker this year, so.
Get a preview.
Someone said to me that they thought that was one of the most brilliant appointments ever. Yep. There you go. All right. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for your interest and for keeping us on our toes and honest. And thank you, Bishop Sally, for all the great information and perspective you brought. Have a great blessed afternoon.
And you're in my prayers, because I know this impacts you in a very real way as United Methodists seeking to be in ministry. So you will be in my prayers.